All right, so today I want to do a political compass test. Now, this is something I've never done, and I thought it'd be interesting to do. I seen Stephen Crowder do it, so I thought I would do it because I haven't done one of these in a while. So this is the CBC one from it was from the last election, but apparently they still have it up. I wanted one that's kind of tailored more towards Canada, just because some of the I was looking around at some other ones, and there are a lot of more Americanized ones that, like I say, more Americanized. So again, the other thing too, I didn't see that a lot of these other ones don't have a neutral answer. It's either, agree, strongly agree, or disagree, strongly disagree. And I like that this one has a actually I don't know or an about the same. So that's something I really like. But it's 30 questions, so I'll get right into it here. And the first thing I want to mention too is that there's some questions that I'm guessing I won't really have much of a strong opinion on. So I'll try and mention those, and I'll try and mention the ones I do. Now, some of them too are kind of somewhat trick questions that, depending on how you interpret it, you could sway me to believe one position or the other. But again, I'll try and answer the best I can. Anyway, so getting right into it. First question, how much should Canada do to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions? Now, we definitely should reduce it, but the problem that the question I think they're trying to get at here is how much of it, how how drastic of action should we take to address climate change is how I'm interpreting that. Um, we should try and reduce emissions, but the problem is that their solution to it would be carbon tax, massive regulation, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to say somewhat less. Um, Next question, how much financial assistance should the federal government provide to first-time home buyers? Um, Again, this is somewhat of a trick question because the problem right now is that housing prices are propped up a lot. Housing prices shouldn't be nearly as high as they are. Median income should be a lot higher. So in a perfect world, it should be nothing. Um, but given how dire the situations are right now, especially, I mean, the housing prices are actually currently kind of going down due to this whole virus thing. So I think the housing prices are going to go down. That there's going to be I wouldn't say a big crash, but again, real estate's definitely going to go down. But I'm going to say about the same because they do provide a little bit, but in an ideal world, if they were running the government how I would be running it again, median income would be higher. Not to mention too that the housing prices wouldn't be nearly as propped up as they currently are. So it would be a lot more affordable for the average person to buy a house. So I'll just say about the same because I don't really have a strong opinion. People who use illicit drugs should have access to supervised injection sites. This isn't really one I have a strong opinion on. I think most major drugs, actually, I mean all major drugs should be, all illicit drugs should be legalized. But on the other hand, we shouldn't have free healthcare. So if you want to, shoot yourself up with whatever for a living and die when you're 30 or 40 because of it, go right ahead. But if we're going to have free healthcare, then I don't think that I think that they should be illegal and there should be restrictions. So, um, considering the fact that the way we're currently running the system, I don't see we're going away from free healthcare at any point. I'm going to say somewhat disagree because I think it just encourages people to use more. Again, this is a absolutely crazy position right here. Handguns should be banned in Canada. Strongly disagree. That's something that I can definitely say I strongly disagree on. Um, Quebec should be formally recognized as a nation in the Constitution. Again, strongly disagree. And again, if Quebec wants to leave, go ahead and leave. I mean, I want Alberta and Saskatchewan to leave. If Quebec wants to leave, they should be able to go ahead and leave. So the government should fund childcare centers instead of giving money directly to parents. I would say no for this one because again, we want to we want to let people, number one, let people figure it out for themselves too. I don't want the government to be running anything. The problem is that when the government starts to run childcare centers, the people that are running these centers are going to care more about getting their money than caring about the kids. Now, caring about the kids does go a little bit hand in hand, but again, the problem is that, again, if the funding's coming directly from the government, they care more about the money than the kids. If they're if there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to stay in business, because the problem is if the government's giving them money, they don't really have to win you over to get your kids to come there. They don't have to provide as much value. So again, I'm going to say somewhat disagree Canada's human rights laws should require that trans persons be referred to by their preferred gender rights pronoun, or sorry, gender pronoun. Again, strongly disagree. Not because I don't think that you should call them by their preferred thing, but because if you want to force people to call them whatever, if my pronoun is the F word or my pronoun is, elephant, like again, at what point do we question this? That's the problem with this kind of stuff. We're going too far. So strongly disagree on that, on the basis that it's anti-free speech in every way, shape, and form. Um, how much should government how much should the government do to make amends for the past treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada? Again, this one I'm gonna say less, because not because I hate Indigenous people or any of that kind of stuff. Number one, because we've already done quite a bit. Number two, because I think that not that what we did was good. I think we've had it beat into us long enough that we can stop hating on ourselves for what we did. Again, no other race or area of people other than Canadians and Americans and Europeans have this massive guilt for things that are done in the past. Again, the Muslim slave trade was much, much bigger than the American slave trade. But the first thing you think of when you hear slavery is, white Americans that, had these slaves. There was more whites, enslaved than there was blacks throughout history. But again, do you care about that? No. So that's the problem too with this kind of stuff. It's not that I hate Indigenous people. It's just that um, the more the government does, the more the Indigenous are going to become dependent upon government. So let's stop giving them, unfair treatment. They should be treated the same as everyone else. And the problem is that natives have very distinct advantages over the average person right now. So I'm going to say somewhat less. Single-use plastic should be banned immediately. Strongly disagree. Everyone should know why that. How much should wealthier people pay in taxes? Again, I'm torn between much less and somewhat less. And again, the only reason that you want to make the wealthier pay more is because you're greedy and you want to take money from them. They already pay much more than their quote unquote fair share than the average person. So again, it's a completely loaded question. And people who want the rich to pay more are people that are either so rich that an increase in taxes won't hurt them, or they're poor middle class people who just want to steal some of their money. Like, let's just be honest about that. The federal cabinet should be evenly split between men and women. Again, strongly disagree. It should be based on competence. I don't care if you're a woman or a man. This whole forced gender stuff is so stupid. Are we going into areas where white men are underrepresented and being like, hey, we got to get more white men in there? Are we going into areas where there's less conservatives and saying we got to get more conservatives in there? No. The left only wants it because the more women that are in government, the more likely leftist policies are going to be implemented. So that's a completely stupid question, so strongly disagree. Canadian government should cover the cost of common prescription drugs. Again, that's just more socialism, so no. How much should be done to accommodate religious minorities in Canada? Again, this is just a loaded let's help out Muslims question. That's how I'm interpreting it again, so I'm going to do somewhat less. How much of a role should the private sector have in healthcare? Obviously, much more. How accessible should abortion services be across Canada? Somewhat less. Again, I've made videos about abortion, so check that out. I'm not going to get into that topic right now. Um, Migrants entering Canada should not be allowed to claim asylum. Strongly agree for obvious reasons. I've made tons of videos about immigration, so check those out. And again, the basic reason is we don't have the money to pay for more immigrants. We already can't pay for the amount we currently have. How much should the government spend on military? I'm not sure exactly how much Canada spends, but I'm going to say about the same because again, I don't have a strong opinion. I don't know as much about the government spending on military as much as I do about some other stuff. So I'm going to say about the same. Quebec should become an independent state. I really don't care if the people of Quebec want to become an independent state. Go right ahead. So I'm going to say neutral. And actually, yeah, honestly, let's see if I can go back here. I'm going to say agree because I think it would be a good thing if Quebec left Canada, to be honest. How many immigrants should Canada admit? Many fewer. Again, that's obvious. We can't afford the amount we're currently having, so having more is just going into more and more debts, and that's going to kill us in the long run. How much influence should unions have? Again, I would say somewhat less. Again, not that I disagree with unions. The problem is the forced unions and the fact that they're only, all they care about is more money for themselves in a lot of cases. So the Canadian government should recognize systematic violence against Indigenous women and girls as a form of genocide. Again, this is a somewhat loaded question. I would say, honestly, the problem with this is most of those people were killed by Native men. So again, it's kind of a loaded question in a designed to get people to think that it was white men that did it, or mostly white men. So honestly, I'm just going to say neutral because it really doesn't matter to me at this point. The government should guarantee a minimum income for all Canadians. No, no, it's socialism, so strongly disagree. The federal government should impose a carbon tax on provinces without a tax of their own. Again, I've made tons of videos on that, so you know why. The Canadian government should stand up to countries that commit human rights abuses, even if it puts Canada's economic interests at risk. Um, this is something that I think most people on both sides would agree with. The problem is that most people, especially in the left, don't actually believe in that kind of stuff, because if they actually believed in that kind of stuff, they'd be calling out the Middle East and Africa and China. But the problem is most of these people on the left, they couldn't care less about Africa, Middle East, and China because, well, they already agree with him with most stuff. So again, if you're going to answer yes to this, or agree or strongly agree, you need to stand up to these Islamic countries and China, namely. But again, the left's never going to do that because China's already communist, so that's exactly what the left wants. And if you call out Islam, they get pretty violent. So that's why the left loves calling out Christianity, because Christians have a turn the other cheek mentality. Muslims tend to have a we're going to kill you mentality. So, and again, I'm just talking about on average. Obviously, there's some peaceful Muslims. Obviously, there's some violent Christians, but on average, that's the case. Um, I'm gonna say strong. I'm gonna say somewhat agree, because I'm sure there's some circumstances to where, um, actually, honestly, I'm gonna say neutral because I think other countries should be able to do do what they please. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be, again, we don't want to be world police. But again, this is kind of a loaded question that I don't really want to get too much into now. So I'm going to put neutral. The federal budget deficit should be reduced, even if it leads to fewer public services. Obviously, strongly agree. Again, I've made plenty of videos about this. We can have slightly less public services now, or we can have way less public services in the future. Just take your pick. We can have slightly less, free stuff now, or we can have the system completely collapse in the future. And the problem is most people are too ignorant and too, for lack of a better word, dumb to think of the future. So that's why they support this kind of stuff. But I'm going to put strongly agree. How much tax should large corporations pay? I would say about the same, because I think that the having massive, whenever you hear people talk about raising taxes on these large corporations, their goal of it is just so they can have more socialistic policies. So that's why I'm not for taxing. I don't think anyone should be taxed more. How much money should the federal government redistribute from provinces that have more, that have less? Again, it's just more socialism, so much less. And again, Alberta gets absolutely screwed from this kind of stuff. Canada should end its ties to the monarchy. Again, strongly agree. Um, how easy should it be to qualify for employment insurance? I would say about the same. How much help should the oil and gas industry get from the Canadian government? Again, this is a question that it depends how you interpret it. If we're going to have massive amounts of regulation and bureaucracy, it has to be much more. But if we had an actual free market and the government just left them alone, it could be somewhat less. But I'm going to say about the same because, like I say, it depends on how you interpret it. And again, this is just stuff that I'm just gonna. I don't trust the NDP. I don't really trust Andrew Scheer. I do trust Maxime Bernier. Again, zero, zero, zero. Um, no, 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 no. I did vote PPC, so I'll put that. Maxime, I would say like a 7 or 8 out of 10. Andrew Scheer, maybe 3. These guys are all very low on the scale. Um, Again, this is something that I'm just going to put don't know for these questions, just because it doesn't really matter. Um, I'm just going to skip this stuff because I don't think it really matters. So loading my results here, let's see where we end up. I am basically in between. And again, the problem with this too is that they're slightly not exactly. The Conservative Party of Canada isn't this far to the again. They're not economically to the right. They're very in the middle. Socially, I would say they're actually right about here. To be honest, they're not that far economically to the right. Neither is the PPC. I mean, the PPC is very socially progressive on a lot of issues. Like the PPC would be for marijuana legalization. They may even be for more than just that legalization. So again, it's kind of a loaded question. That again, that's where I end up. The problem with these tests is that, especially a CBC test, the minute you say you want less immigration, less gun control, they're going to put you as quote unquote far right. So yeah, that's the problem. The other thing too that they put me as farther socially to the right than the PPC and the CPC, which I don't really think is the case, partially because I mean, for starters, I'm for all drug legalization, and the problem is I don't think any of these guys are. I don't think literally any party is. Um, the other thing I'd mention too is that although I don't really don't care about gay marriage, lesbian marriage, any of that kind of stuff, the thing I have a problem with is that these polls tend to interpret as that, oh, if you're not for drag queen story hour, if you're not for 6-year-old drag queens dancing in front of fully grown men, then that must mean you're completely against everything, including gay marriage. Well, no, I'm just against the absolutely crazy stuff, not gay marriage. I don't care about that kind of stuff. So that's something I wanted to point out. But anyway, that's where I turned out. So yeah, that's where I turned out. Again, it was almost exactly where I expected to be anyway, especially considering it's a CBC poll. But anyway, that's where I turned out. So I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to make sure that like and subscribe, check out my PayPal. I got linked in the description. I got my email for e-transfer. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already, and check out my BitChute channel again. YouTube's gonna ban or shadow ban me at some point, so check me out there.